both at the state and federal levels, for common sense gun laws. This morning, we're privileged to have with us Leah Kondes, the lead for the Minnesota chapter. When it's time for questions, please raise your hand and we'll bring you a mic so that the folks at home as well as you can hear the questions. And without further ado, Leah, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Good morning. Thanks for having me. I'll try to stay near the mic for recording and live stream purposes. Jackie gave me a promotion. I just lead the Minneapolis local group, but that's okay. That's okay. I think maybe a good place to start, I'll cover some of what we already talked about, Jackie, but why I care about this issue. So I've been part of Moms Demand Action since 2019. I have 3 daughters. The oldest one was born in 1999, which is when Columbine happened. And somehow, so I just remember being home with my new baby and watching that and crying. Somehow, for 20 years, I was able to just kind of keep that in a box and compartmentalize. But in 2019, maybe some of you remember this, there was a mass shooting in El Paso on a Saturday and Dayton on a Sunday. And that broke me. That put me over the edge, and I was like, I don't want to live in a country that has mass shootings on 2 consecutive days. And that's when I had just finally woke up, and I was like, oh my gosh, this has been my kid's whole life. And it feels like it's getting worse instead of getting better. So thankfully, and I was like, well, at least Zoe, that's my oldest daughter, I'm like, well, at least she's old enough to vote, but what about her younger sisters? So it's like literally parental responsibility that shoved me into this and keeps me there, if I'm being honest. Like, I am doing this to keep my kids safe, to keep me and other people I care about safe, and if it keeps you and people you care about safe too, great, that's a win. The ironic thing is, during my time with Moms Demand Action, my youngest daughter was at the mall for one of their shootings and the state fair for one of their shootings. First one I kind of took in stride. I thought, well, it was just a matter of time, right? And I'm like, hopefully this is as close as it ever gets. But then with the state fair, that really made me mad. Because I'm like, come on, you guys. Teenagers should be able to go to the mall, go to the fair, and not worry about getting shot. So that's why I care about it. Why I'm here, my friend Jill invited me. So maybe you remember last year when the Minneapolis police officer was shot and killed. I understand this parking lot was used as a staging area for MPD. And Jill invited me in to meet with one of your pastors, and I was put on the agenda for January. And I said, you know what? Gun violence is probably still going to be a problem in January 2025, and sure enough, it is. Did I know I would be here the Sunday after the inauguration and who would be elected? No, I didn't, but here we are. So it is what it is. What I hope you take away from today is hope. And I'm going to test out some new material on you guys, and it's going to be kind of churchy, and I hope that's okay since we're at a church. But I brought with me this book of devotions. I found it in a little free library, love those things, and started reading this on May 7th of last year, which is my youngest daughter's birthday. And so the other morning, I read something, and I knew I had this coming up, and it kind of made me think of you guys, so I wanted to share it with you. So the title of this devotion is Ask for Hebron. And this scripture verse is Psalm 94, verse 19. When doubts filled my mind, your comfort gave me renewed hope and cheer. Turn a deaf ear to doubters. Ignore the naysayers. People have a right to say what they want, and you have a right to ignore them. When the 12 spies reported back to Moses, all but Caleb and Joshua were spouting doubt. They were outnumbered 10-2, but they still believed in God's power. Let's take our cue from Caleb. Disregard the lethal disbelief of cynics. This is no sanction for rudeness or isolation. When people express their sincere struggles or questions, help them. But some folks do not want to be helped. They would rather pull you down than let you pull them up. Don't let them. Caleb didn't. He filled his mind with faith and took on a God-sized challenge. When Moses sent Caleb to spy out the land, Caleb saw something that troubled him, the town of Hebron. Abraham had buried his wife there. He was buried there. So were Isaac, Rebekah, and Jacob. Hebron was a sacred site, but it was inhabited by unholy people. So Caleb asked Moses for Hebron. Moses took the request to God, and Caleb was given the land. 45 years later, at the age of 85, the old soldier chased the enemy and reclaimed the city. Caleb wanted to do something great for God. He lived with a higher call. You can too. Ask for your Hebron. So we're going to talk about gun violence prevention. And sorry, my slides aren't pretty, they're just functional. But, and just to manage expectations, gun violence is, prevention is long, hard, slow work. So come join us. We like to say it's a marathon, not a sprint. Sometimes if it's more helpful, I am not a runner, so I'm like, whoa, marathon, I don't want to run a marathon. Think of it as a relay race. So if you're ready to tap in, we'd love to have you, and if at any point you're like, I gotta take a break, that is just fine. Jill's been at it longer than me. I think she's older and wiser than me. And so I think it was the Pulse nightclub shooting in Florida that put Jill in the movement. Yeah, so you can come in if you want. Okay. All right, so without further ado, we're going to talk about current and proposed Minnesota gun laws. Legislation is not the only approach, but oftentimes when I'm tabling or something like that, and people say, what are we going to do about gun violence prevention? I start there just because it's sort of easy to understand, right? Like, here's our proposal, here's who's against it, for it, blah, blah, blah. And it can impact a lot of people, but it's not the only thing. But we will talk about that today. How our faith is tied to this movement. This is kind of a new area I'm exploring personally. And again, just to manage expectations, I'm just a volunteer. I am not an expert. Hopefully I have something to offer today. I'd love to hear what you do too, but something new I've been thinking about this past year is Christian nationalism. And what's the difference between Christianity and Christian nationalism? Because I spent a lot of time at the Capitol last year, and I heard some of our state representatives quoting scripture in opposition of safe storage laws and name-dropping Jesus. And I'm like, what Jesus are you talking about? Like, we are not reading the same book. So I've been trying to wrap my head around that and understand that, because I think that is part of the problem. And then how to better inform our stances with facts and faith expressions. I think facts are important because there's a lot of misinformation, disinformation, myths, whatever you want to call it. So that's a challenge, I'll just name that, right? Like sometimes we are not all operating from the same set of facts. And then I think the faith expressions are important, like why? Why do I care about this issue? Why do I think you should care about this issue? Why should we care about this issue? So that's what's coming up. Okay, why we should care. And I don't know. The yellow's a little hard to read, I apologize. But just a few things to call out on this slide. And these are 2022 Minnesota statistics. Of the 559 Minnesotan lives lost due to gun violence that year, 71% were suicides. So while it was mass shootings that propelled me into this movement, and Jill too, that's something I've learned this past 5.5 years, is the reality of like, you know, what gets reported and what's actually happening. Sometimes those things don't align. And so we need to pay attention to this. I won't lie, people say some crazy things to you when you're tabling. And you don't always know the right thing to say in the moment. So I had somebody say to me one time, well, if somebody wants to off themselves, that's their right. And I was just like, wow. That's just crazy to me. So, I've thought about that, like, what would I say if somebody said that to me again? I guess, maybe you can make that choice for yourself as an adult, but like, when you're a parent, when you work so hard to like bring this life into the world and nurture it or whatever, obviously you want to protect it. And if your child is going through something, a mental health crisis or whatever, I would like to think as the parent that I would have the right to intervene. Good news, now we do. So just to go back to legislation for a moment, last legislative session, not so productive, but the year before, 2023, we did pass extreme risk protection orders. That law went into effect on January 1st of last year, so we've had it for a year. And this is a law, if you know someone who has access to firearms, you have reason to believe they're a threat to themselves or someone else, you can go through this process, petition the court, have those firearms temporarily removed. So it's kind of like getting a restraining order. I'll just tell a personal story. I think it's okay because I've gotten permission to share this story in the past. But my husband has a cousin. He had a son named Wyatt. And John knew that his son had purchased a gun. And he knew that his son was suicidal. He tried to buy the gun from him, reason with him, all the things. And Wyatt ended up taking his life and leaving behind a 1-year-old child. That was pre-ERPO. That's what these extreme risk protection orders are sometimes called, ERPOs or red flag laws. So now, hopefully, if that was around, hopefully we can prevent other families going through that. Just to call out, or maybe I'll say one more thing about suicides. Something else I've learned over the years is that mass shootings are a form of suicide, right? Not too many mass shooters go to the nightclub or the school or wherever they're going with a getaway car or a getaway plan. They are going to take their own life, die by cop, or maybe end up in jail the rest of their lives. So, and also if you look at domestic violence, right? I just learned a horrible new phrase last year. What was it? Well, it's basically family extermination. So you get the idea. So sometimes suicidal people take other folks out with them. So just in case you didn't care about suicide, now hopefully you do. And then the other stat I wanted to call out from this slide is that gun deaths in Minnesota are up 42% since 2019. If I had to guess why that is, I would say in 2020, if you remember 5 years ago, we had the pandemic. There was the murder of George Floyd. I think some people felt unsafe, purchased a gun, maybe didn't even know what the heck to do with it. You know what I mean? They felt like they needed it to keep themselves safe, but maybe didn't have training, maybe didn't know about safe storage, that sort of thing. So that's what I would point to there. All right. So this first stat, 54% of Minnesotans who own firearms do not properly store them. I'm going to share a story with you. Again, thinking about like crazy things I've heard and things I wish I would have said. Someone said to me, I'm being very careful now with my language since I know this is live streamed and recorded. Someone said to me, well, I have, everybody, all the gun owners I know store them safely. And so now I just want to say, well, good for you. You're lucky. But I just want to point out, we don't know everything, right? Like our experience is not everyone's experience. And so that's, again, we're being grounded in some of these statistics can be helpful. The second bullet point on this slide, most homicides in Minnesota are committed with a firearm. I think it's important to name that because guns are designed to kill, and they're very effective. All right, just some more stats. Black Americans are 2 times as likely as white Americans to die from gun violence. What I'd like to say about that is it doesn't matter who's pulling the trigger or the color of their skin. All gun violence is bad, in my opinion. So I don't care if it's a cop pulling the trigger or someone from the neighborhood. This whole, black on black violence, no. Just let's get rid of that. It's just perpetuating stereotypes and racism and all the things. So we don't care who's pulling the trigger, what color their skin is. All gun violence is bad. Gun violence in schools, I know Jill used to be a teacher before she retired. In all school shootings, there are warning signs displayed beforehand. Withdrawal, bullying, making threats, etc. And in 77% of school shooting incidents, others were aware of the shooter's plans in advance. So that's where these ERPOs, I'm hoping, will be helpful. And then the first stat under that gun violence in schools header, in 80% of school shootings, the weapon was obtained from home or from a friend or relative. So again, really just the importance of safe storage, which we define as keep your weapon, if you have one, locked, unloaded, and keep the ammunition locked up separate from that as well. All right. Oh my gosh. So just a couple things I want to call out on this slide. The U.S. accounts for 35% of all firearm suicides, despite accounting for just 4% of the world's population. In 2021, a record 48,830 Americans lost their lives to gun violence. The United States has more guns than it does people. So yes, the U.S. is exceptional, and not in a good way. And I think access to guns is one of the problems, right? It's not that we have more mentally ill people, it's that we have mentally ill people and access to firearms, and it's a deadly combination. I'm reading a book right now called One Nation Under Guns. Full disclosure, I am not a gun owner. Moms Demand Action is not against gun owners. Guns are gun owners. We're for gun safety and against gun violence. Nonetheless, I'm just trying to understand, why is our country so different in this area than other countries? So I'm not done reading the book yet, but I'll give you my book report on what I've read so far. Maybe not surprisingly, it goes back to the founding of our country, right? We showed up, there were people here, we bossed them around, scalped them, put them on reservations. Our country started with violence. And then we brought people over from Africa to work the plantations, and we treated them violently. And so it's really deep, you guys. And again, for those who came in late, we're gonna end on a hopeful note, I promise. But, so that's part of it. So that's, I don't want to say interesting to me, but just something I've been thinking about as I try to figure this out. The first chapter is called The Myth of the Law-Abiding Citizen. And the premise is that, law-abiding citizens should be able to own firearms. Well, the truth is, we all have good and bad within us. So this false dichotomy of the good guys and the bad guys, no, we're all both. And hopefully most of us have good days where the good wins out. But what happens is a law-abiding citizen gets a gun, then commits a crime with a gun. Oh, what do? We just reclassify them. Oh, now you're one of the bad guys. But we're gonna keep perpetuating this myth of the law-abiding citizen. So that's a new idea that I've been thinking about thanks to this book. All right, root causes of gun violence. It's a long list, but I'll call out some of them. Substance abuse disorder, I want to name. This is something I heard over at the Capitol from people pushing back on some of our proposals. Well, what about fentanyl? Fentanyl kills more people than guns. And I'm like, oh my gosh, why does it have to be an either or? Like, can't we take care of this? And maybe that would like help both. One of our volunteers at our meeting earlier this month, we've been going around to all the different wards in the city and inviting the council member from that ward to speak to us. This month we heard from Ward 12 council member Oreen Chowdhury, and she has a background in affordable housing, and she's really focused on homelessness, which we know is an issue in our city as well. And I said, well, thank you for doing that, because we know there's been shootings at these homeless encampments, and so that's part of my pitch to you today too. Like, if you're already focused on an issue and you're working on that, great, thank you. Keep doing it, because pretty much almost anything you're working on this list can be considered gun violence prevention. But my friend Colleen said, anything that makes life harder, right? Anything that would cause someone to think, well, I'm gonna, pick up a gun because I'm rolling with a gang, or I'm selling drugs, or whatever. Like, just there's sort of these coexisting factors. The other myth I would like to bust is that guns do not make us safer, in my opinion. And I brought with me today, this is some information on what the police department in Mendota Heights is doing. Now, I know that Minneapolis is not Mendota Heights, but in the interest of new ideas, when someone applies for a gun permit in Mendota Heights, they get a piece of paper, and at the top it says, the gun you purchase with this permit is more likely to harm someone you love than it is to protect you from something you fear. I love that, just like even introducing that idea. Okay, so we're going to get to solutions. How can Minnesotans work to address these problems? We've talked about safe storage already, so that's number 4 on the list here, responsible ownership. I think a lot of times in our country, when we talk about guns, there's rights, right? Oh, my rights, Second Amendment, all the things. So I would just like to see the rights conversation be balanced a little more with responsibilities, right? So my good news for you here is that we were tabling in North Minneapolis in October. I met our Hennepin County attorney, Mary Moriarty. One of our volunteers said to her, well, you know, Mary, over in Ramsey County, they give out free gun locks at their library. And so coming soon to a Hennepin County library near you will be gun locks. So that's something new that we're trying this year, and I'm excited about that. All right, I'm gonna have to pick up the pace so you all have time to ask questions. This is as of 2023, so as I said, we did pass background checks on all gun sales and extreme risk protection orders a couple years ago. In Minnesota, domestic abusers cannot own firearms, but that is not a national law. So it would be wonderful if we had a federal solution to all this, but we're just gonna be scrappy and do what we can at the state level, county, local, whatever it takes. And I also wanted to put this up here because we may need to defend the laws that we have. I don't know if you all have been paying attention the past couple of years, but sometimes different people come in and they're like to take us back in time. So, and this is old, so sorry, I didn't give credit to this. This all comes from an interfaith toolkit that was developed by Protect Minnesota, which is another gun violence prevention organization. So Moms Demand Action is not the only game in town. We are a national organization. I like being part of a national organization because it's a national problem, but we collaborate with them as well. So Again, this is old information, but I left this in because I hear that stand your ground may be coming back. And so you'll see that near the bottom, extending rights available to a person in their dwelling for self-defense purposes. So just to level set with all of you, I'm not super optimistic about this legislative session. Again, if you've been paying attention, it's a little chaotic over there in St. Paul right now. So I thought, well, I welcomed back legislators on the 14th or whenever that is. We have our Advocacy Day coming up March 19th, and that might be it, right? We go over there and just remind them, like, we care about this issue. Here's some solutions we think we might work. We're not going away, basically is our key message. Like, we will keep showing up, and you can either get on board, or we're going to work to elect people who will be on board with this. But we might have to show up and do some defensive stuff, so stay tuned for that. I also share this just because I think there's some things on this list that I would not be in favor of. So things like permitless carry or school staff carrying firearms. Jill, you can speak to that as a former educator. My dad was a high school English teacher. Again, something I've read is, and if you think about these school shooters, oftentimes they're students or former students. And I've heard educators say, like, teachers don't want to shoot their students. They care about their students. So anyway, I don't like that idea. So yeah. And I will say one thing about the Second Amendment, and there's a whole section in this toolkit about, like, our founding documents, and we don't have time to go through it all today, but again, in this book I'm reading, it talks about the Second Amendment and this idea of a well-regulated militia. And so this author's point of view is, it wasn't saying each of us have the right to carry arms. It was this idea of a well-regulated militia. So that might be something else we can talk about more on another day. Okay, we're gonna talk about the faith stuff. How's our faith tied to this movement? I'm gonna read this. Here, I'm gonna do this. What is a biblical ethic for gun violence prevention? We may begin in Genesis 1 and 2 with the two creation accounts. God created the earth and all life, and it was good. Good is the will of God, meaning a Garden of Eden, a creation, in harmony, in balance, in peace, in nonviolence, in shalom. Similarly, humankind was created in God's image to reflect God's goodness and God's will. Yet contrary to God's will, humankind chose to sin, to disobey God's will, choosing to deny living in the image of God and to harm God's creation by killing. The will of God / image of God is further clarified in the 10 Commandments, each of which is a call to nonviolent life. But what about the Old Testament war stories, which have served as theological justification of state violence throughout history? In sum, it is proper to think of this violence as the embodiment of human brokenness and a rejection of God's will and being created in the image of God. So why Jesus? Jesus Christ was necessary to remind us what it means to be fully human, people created in the image of God to do the will of God. The cross of Christ exemplifies taking violence upon oneself rather than inflicting it upon others. He came to direct us in the image of God, He came to direct us in how to reflect God's original intention for us to do God's nonviolent will in the world. The image of God / will of God are linked to Jesus Christ. In the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus enjoins all followers, "Blessed are the peacemakers." Then later, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and might, and your neighbor as yourself. There is no eye for an eye." Furthermore, it is this Jesus love that casts out fear. Fear is a prime motivator for gun violence. The foundational ethic of Jesus was nonviolence. In Galatians chapter 5, verses 22 and 23, the Apostle Paul writes of the fruits of the Spirit: love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, gentleness, faithfulness, generosity, and self-control. The fruits are nonviolent. It is clear that gun violence prevention is consistent with the biblical ethic of nonviolence, compelling personal and public actions which promote safety and limit gun violence. And that was written by Reverend Ron Letness, and he's part of the Protect Minnesota Interfaith Alliance. I talked about the myth of the law-abiding citizen, and for me, you know, as I've thought about this, what am I going to say to these legislators quoting scripture from the House floor? Like, well, what about the 10 Commandments, right? Like, thou shalt not kill. That seems pretty clear to me. And, you know, as I try to understand different points of view, I do think some people own guns because they feel unsafe. And I wish they did feel safe. And we should work to make that a reality. And at the same time, in my non-binary world, once you buy a gun, to me, this is now I'm talking personal, Leah, not Moms Demand Action Leah, but to me, you have crossed that line where you've given yourself permission to take another person's life. You may hope you never have to use it, you may hope you never do that, but you've purchased a deadly weapon. And so for me, I just keep that, I've closed the door on that option for myself. The other thing I think that is important from what I read is this idea of fear. Who benefits by keeping us afraid? It's the gun manufacturers. And I maybe said this, Jill, in our meeting with your pastor, but I haven't fact-checked this. You guys can do it. But I hear in the Bible, it says, fear not, do not be afraid. Some version of that, 365 times. One for each day of the year, more than anything else in the Bible. And so I'm just really leaning on that because it is scary. We were tabling at Pride last June, and one of our volunteers said, this feels like the kind of place someone could get shot. And I said, well, yes, and I could also get shot at the grocery store. And I'm not going to stop buying groceries. So that's why we're doing the work. Let's see. Yeah, that's what I wanted to say about that. All right, I'm going to wrap things up here soon so y'all can ask questions and tell me where I went wrong. All right, how to better inform our stances with facts and faith expressions. I guess the point I would like to make here is I want to call out that prayer is important. Like, we could sure use some divine assistance on this and many, many other issues in our life, and so I think it couldn't hurt to start with prayer. I'm probably going to zip through these because I want to be done talking and let you all talk. Yeah. What are my faith leaders' official positions on this issue? This is interesting for me. I forgot to mention this in my introduction, but I belong to a Catholic church, and actually the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops has quite a lot to say about gun laws, which I think is a surprise to a lot of Catholics. I feel like on the pro-life issue that a lot of emphasis on this spectrum of from conception until natural death has been a little weighted towards the conception part and less on what follows that. So I'm trying to educate people about that. The other things I want to say about creating a personal story. Sorry, I'm skipping ahead so you guys can talk. I'm going to read an example here. In this example, it says, it's clear to me that gun violence is a problem here in Minnesota. Specifically, as a former teacher, I see the trauma that students are exposed to when we do active shooter drills. I'm working with Protect Minnesota, Moms Demand Action, to try to end active shooter drills, which don't keep kids safe while traumatizing them at school. The mental health of our children is vital, and we need to ensure that they have access to the resources they need at school and at home. And so I just want to plant that seed with you, this idea of a personal story. I hope you're never shot. I hope someone you care about is never shot. But we all have a reason for caring about this issue. Like, that's your personal story. So, yeah, don't wait to be a statistic. get involved now and hopefully prevent that. So I will close because I'm over time. I did write one for myself as an example, so I'll just read it to you. Since 2020, gun violence has become the #1 killer of children and teens. My middle daughter, works in a school, and I worry about a child finding an unsecured firearm and bringing it to school. I'm working with Moms Demand Action to advocate for safe storage laws. Responsible gun ownership is one strategy we should use to reduce gun violence. Thank you all for showing up and for listening. I would love to take your comments, questions. Jackie's going to the microphone, so.
Getting this ready to pass. I'll take advantage of the pause. What do you feel is doable in this legislative session?
Oh my gosh. Oh, that's a good setup, Jackie, thank you. Okay, so at the beginning I said legislation's not the only thing. So what are the other things? So I kind of like to talk about 3 pillars. Legislation, education, activation. I think we will be leaning hard on education this year. Getting the word out about safe storage, educating people about ERPOs. When we table, which we're doing next month at the Community Connections Conference, I think that's Saturday, February 8th at the Convention Center, we will hand out free gun locks. Even if you're not a gun owner, if you have kids or grandkids and you're sending them to someone else's home and you don't know those people that well, asking like, do you have firearms in your home and are they stored securely? That is where we will lean, and the other thing we try to do at tabling is build our movement, right? It's gonna take a lot of us. What are we up against? The NRA. Now they're on a downward decline. Hopefully that trend continues, but we need to build ours up. We need to make it politically unpopular to vote against us on this issue. And so my goal, I work in communications, I would love Moms Demand Action to have the same brand recognition as the NRA. So it's good to have big goals. But yeah, legislatively, my goal for this legislative session is that there are no bad bills that are passed. So I think our priorities in the short term will be safe storage. There was also a lost and stolen firearms bill last session, so mandatory reporting for that. A lot of people, I think, would like to see an assault weapons ban, but we're trying to just chip away at it. I'll tell you that the other side, their strategy is to fight every little thing, tooth and nail. And so my new mantra is that's fine. You want to play the long game? I can play the long game. I'm Irish and German, so I am feisty and stubborn. And bring it on, bring it on. I forgot this part of my introduction too. So in 2019 when I got involved, I decided I'm committing myself to this issue for 20 years. So I've got 5 years in the rearview mirror, only 15 more to go, so 25% of the way there. But when I shared that with someone early on, they said, oh, it's good that you have that attitude because it's probably going to take that long. And I thought, well, I hope not. Because as a rookie, when I first came into the movement, I thought, this is easy. I mean, not easy, but I'm we know what to do. We just have to do it, right? Every other country in the world has figured this out except us. But it's the wanting to do it part that is tripping us up a little bit, and I would say the money in government is not helpful, right, from the gun lobby. So that was a very convoluted answer, Jackie, to say I don't have high hopes for this legislative session, but that doesn't mean we're going to stop.
Recently, the parents of teen shooters have been held accountable.
Yeah.
And have been imprisoned and charged. Do you think that's any kind of deterrent, or what? How do you think about that?
Yeah. These thoughts are probably more Leah than Moms Demand Action, and just had a little email back and forth with our Hennepin County attorney on this topic recently because I think MPD put something out on a mother who gave her son a gun, and he had a track record of like carjack, not good behavior, right? And she gave him the gun because he needed it for his safety. So, you know, it's complicated. I understand a mother's desire to protect her child. I also feel like if our litmus test or our standard is responsible gun ownership, then giving the gun to someone who has demonstrated poor choices in the past is probably not a good idea. And so I do feel there needs to be some accountability, right? Like, you know, again, just to review, a gun is a lethal weapon, you know? So you do need to be responsible with that. And I think, I will say, Moms Demand Action is modeled a little bit on this Mothers Against Drunk Driving idea, right? And social norms, culture can change over time. It just takes a while, and it takes a lot of work. So maybe decades ago, parents didn't mind if their underage kids drank in their house. And I think through education and maybe some other deterrents, now a lot of parents would be like, heck no, I don't want to be responsible for that, right? If some underage kid drinks at my house and then gets in a car and kills someone, yeah. The grown-ups need to do some adulting. And I'm really focused on kids and teens right now because the kids didn't ask to be here. We brought them here. And it's the grown-ups' responsibility to take care of them. So that's my point of view. But thank you, I think that's a good question. And I will say, to me, the only wrong answer is do nothing. If we do nothing, then we just get the same results, which right now, to me, is just not sustainable. Like, no one wants to live this way. We can do better.
I'm going to try to sneak in one more. You've mentioned other groups that are working on this. Is there collaboration between the groups?
There is. It's a little bit messy, and I can't, I'll speak to Moms Demand Action because that's the organization I'm most familiar with. So that started after Sandy Hook. And it was started by a mom, Shannon Watts, who, it was kind of like me. It was just like fed up. Like, what do I do? And she's, well, I'm going to start a Facebook group. I mean, like, that's literally what it started as. And I'm sorry, I get like off on these tangents sometimes, but there's legislation, education, and activation. What I would put in our activation category is partnering with other gun violence prevention organizations. So maybe you've seen Mad Dads, Touch Outreach. There's violence interrupters like on the ground trying to mediate and stop those sorts of things from happening. But yes, it's going to take all of us. Giffords, oh my gosh, if you haven't watched Gabby Gifford's movie, you should. It's so good. Just what she went through after she was shot. It's just inspirational. It's a movie about her marriage as much as it is about gun violence. Just like, I highly recommend that. So I don't care where you plug in. If you want to plug in with our group, great. I like to tell people, you don't need to have kids, you don't even need to be a woman. So if you're for gun safety, against gun violence, you can be part of our crew. We'd love to have you. But wherever you want to plug in, that would be great. We need everyone.
Well, thank you very, very much, Leah. Let's give Leah a good hand. And I'd like to remind you that next week, Eric Harris Bernstein will talk about We Make Minnesota, a group advocating for the public funds and investments to make Minnesota a prosperous state for everyone. I'll get
Can
that
I
out,
read
yeah.
one more thing? If you have to go to church, I won't be insulted if you leave, but I promised I would leave on a hopeful note. So this is today's devotion that I read. And the headline is Sufficient Sustaining Grace. And the scriptures from 2 Corinthians chapter 12, verses 7 through 9. I was given a thorn in my flesh, a messenger of Satan to torment me. 3 times I pleaded with the Lord to take it away from me. But he said to me, my grace is sufficient for you. My power is made perfect in weakness. A thorn in the flesh, such vivid imagery. The sharp end of a thorn pierces the soft skin of life and lodges beneath the surface. Every step is a reminder of the thorn in the flesh. The cancer in the body, the child in the rehab center, the red ink on the ledger, the tears in the middle of the night. Take it away, you've pleaded. Not once, twice, or even 3 times. You've outprayed Paul. He prayed a sprint, you've prayed a marathon. But what you hear is this: my grace is sufficient for you. Grace takes on an added dimension here. Paul is referring to sustaining grace. Saving grace saves us from our sins. Sustaining grace meets us at our point of need and equips us with courage, wisdom, and strength. Sustaining grace promises not the absence of struggle, but the presence of God. And according to Paul, God has sufficient sustaining grace to meet every single challenge of our lives. Sufficient. We fear its antonym, insufficient. We've written checks only to see the words insufficient funds. Will we offer prayers only to discover insufficient strength? Never. So I hope I haven't bummed you out too much. Please be hopeful. Please keep praying, keep working, and I appreciate you giving me the opportunity.